digging into why it happens, where it stems from, and how it affects you. 570 News presents Kitchener Today with your host, Brian Burke. Now, special guest host, Brandon Graziano.
Stop me if you've heard this one before. Work sucks. I hate my job. This is the worst. And you're venting to your friend or you're venting to your family about all this and the situation that you're faced with on a day-to-day basis, about how junk work is every time you go in. Thankfully, on a personal note, I have a nice job. I get along with everybody, I think. But maybe I'm just the minority when it comes to that situation. And then when you're venting to these people, they tell you, well, why don't you do something about it? Why don't you go and talk to your manager? Why don't you go and talk to your superiors about this? And then there's that slight hesitation. Well, I would, but, you know, and the excuses fall out and everything like that, because let's be real. Standing up for yourself at work, usually not recommended. You're at fear of losing your job or even moving up within the company, whatever company it may be. But apparently now they're saying, you know what, today's day and age, it's probably the right thing to do, to stand up for yourself. At least that's what some are saying. And I wanted to get the thoughts and the opinion of Frank Newman from Newman Human Resources. Frank, thank you so much for joining the program.
Oh, thanks very much, Brandon. Great to be talking to you today.
Yeah, and you know what? I find it to be an interesting topic and almost like a taboo topic. Not taboo in the sense that people don't talk about work, but taboo in the sense that, you know, if somebody's actually giving you the advice to stand up to a manager and stand up for something that you want at work, well, the thought process changes a little bit.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, I call it the fear factor, because on one hand, you know, you want to speak up for yourself, but on the other hand, you're absolutely terrified because this person holds the reins of power, whether you, in essence, live or die at work. The best thought at this point is really people should really be speaking up, because I've seen too many occasions where people have not spoken up. They become depressed, they become upset, they take it home they take it out on their family, and in fact, often when you do speak up, results happen more often than not. And I've seen cases where people have not spoken up, and instead they decided, I'm going to walk out the door, and they've left the company, and 2 weeks later they would have been promoted. So making your opinions heard in the right way is a really powerful tool, and is really can be transformational in terms of your relationship with your boss.
Now, Frank, I mean, like we said earlier, it's almost easy to say, to stand up to your boss and to say, like, look, this is how I feel and this is what's happening in my day-to-day operations. But I find it's tough to put pen to paper, especially when it comes to this particular situation.
Well, and I like the word you use, pen to paper, because in essence, this has to be a planned conversation, because there are right ways and wrong ways to complain, because you don't want to be seen as a perpetual whiner or perpetual complainer. But what you do want to be seen as is somebody who's articulate and somebody who's in control. And so the skill that people really need to learn is, quite simply, how to manage your boss.
So, and I guess, managing your boss, that almost sounds like it's impossible, but is there a way to do it, Frank?
Absolutely. So there's a number of tips you can do to manage your boss, and a lot of people don't think about this. So the first thing is you've got to assume positive intent. So sometimes when a boss is asking you to work late, giving you poor shifts, the first reaction may be to say, well, this boss is really a SOB or whatever. But on the other hand, you assume that this boss is not doing it deliberately to hurt you or harm you, but assume that they're doing it with a reasonable intention. That's the first step you need to take to kind of clarify your mind and your perspective, because you can't have a discussion with somebody if you automatically assume they're out to get you.
Frank Newman joining me this afternoon with Newman Human Resources, and let's talk about that. Your boss asked you to stay late. When is it okay to say no?
Typically, basically what you need to do, to some extent, you need to pick your moment, and you also need to pick what is a battle and what is not a battle. So if it's an occasional happening and you see the boss is stressed and they say, can you stay late, or insist you stay late, you may just want to go along with that. But if it's a prolonged pattern of over-the-top requests, then you need to. That's when you need to take some action. When you see that this is a regular behavior for an individual. So what I encourage people to do is, first of all, is kind of plan your discussion. So start to think about how you would approach your boss on this, and often it starts with getting the facts. So you've asked me to stay late 10 times this month. Is there? So get some information as to what's the rationale behind that, so that you can put some information on the table. And you also want to think about, what are the questions you would ask them, and what might their responses be, so that you can have a real dialogue.
Now, and here's the thing, and I know every situation is different, and every industry is a little bit different, especially when it comes to, whether it be your managers or your superiors or whomever is in charge anyhow. But yes, like you said, get the facts and whatnot. But even I've heard cases of people who actually do get the facts, and I can tell you, even from personal experience, the last time I stood up to my boss, it didn't go well in my favor, and it didn't really work well for me, even with my future. And therefore, I more or less had to quit because there was no way that I was going to move up. And I'm wondering if with some of your clients, if that's been the reality, is that they do stand up and, quite frankly, they stay stationary, but they need the money because, study just came out earlier this week that we are one paycheck away from becoming completely bankrupt or just breaking even with it anyway.
Yeah, and certainly there are those cases where you may not win with your boss. You may have the discussion, and quite frankly, that may not be the boss you want to be working with for longer term. But on the other hand, if you go through your day-to-day work with this burden hanging over you and not having a way to vent, that can be devastating. I've seen people go into chronic depressions because they're unhappy at work. And so often what you may want to do is get some advice if you have a contentious boss, because we know those exist at least periodically. So options include, you can try going to Human Resources and seeing if they will help you. And sometimes you just want to use them as a sounding board. But again, you've also got to have trust in them that they will respect your confidentiality.
And I guess, Frank, sorry to cut you off there, but I find, at least because you said, go to Human Resources, and you said, you have to respect, you have to find trust in that too. But I'm finding, at least with Human Resources that are hired like within the company, realistically, they're going to, at least in from what I've seen and from what I've heard, because, this isn't the first time this topic has come up in conversation over the past number of years, is that I find that sometimes Human Resources companies, they think about the company. They want to protect the company and not necessarily the worker, it seems like. So, is there any other alternatives other than going to HR about something, or is HR the answer, and should they be providing for the worker and the worker only, and not thinking about the head honchos, if you will?
Right. Well, in a perfect world, if somebody can have a dialogue one-on-one with their supervisor or manager, that's the most powerful tool you can have, because again, you don't need an intermediary, but again, you may want to just plan for that discussion. You may want to, consult with other people who know that manager, because part of the discussion you want to have is you want to be able to put yourself in that manager or that supervisor's shoes. So what are the pressures they're having? What's driving them crazy? How can you help them? So in essence, sometimes you can turn the dialogue around, and, empathy goes a long way. And a lot of people don't necessarily empathize with their bosses. So turning that around and asking, well, what's behind this? What's driving you crazy? How can I help? And so it's getting that understanding, because if you're going to have a dialogue with someone, you've got to build that trust.
Frank, I really appreciate your perspective this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining the show.
Very good. Thanks, Brandon. Keep warm.
Absolutely. That's Frank Newman with Newman Human Resources, saying that it's actually okay to stand up for yourself at work. And it is worth it. Whether it be to show that, look, there's a problem in the day-to-day operations of, whether you're in the manufacturer sector, whether you're in the construction sector. Because I can tell you right now, flat out, and I think we even heard on these airwaves before. Almost like if you want to call it the demeanor, if you want to call it the attitude between construction workers. I hear it all the time from my friends who are in the construction industry, who do construction on a day-to-day basis. They treat each other like you know what, because they just want to get in, get out, and that's it. I mean, they're working in the cold. I'll be honest with you, I can't remember the last friend of mine that I had, or that I have, that's in the construction industry that enjoys their job. But, you know, they go to the foreman and they say, hey, what's this? And the foreman just says, all right, well, you know, go home then, and you're not getting paid. I find it's different between industry and industry. I get what Frank is saying, but there's almost some risks too, right? By standing up for yourself at work. And like I was saying to Frank, I've done it before too. I've done it before. It did not end well in my favor. I became this stationary guy, and that was it. Didn't move up, didn't move down, but I didn't move up for about a year. And it sucked. And I ended my tenure at this place partially because of that. Because I didn't move up. And you think that, you know, you ask for, you know, for advice and you know, not necessarily for a promotion, and you're asking for a raise or anything like that, but you ask because you want to improve and you want to do better within the company and you want to be better for the company and you want to be better as a person yourself. So it goes both ways, I find. There is a very high risk and high reward type situations when approaching your superiors at work. And once again, it's also based on the comfort that you have between you and your boss. I can tell you personally right now, I have no problem with talking to my boss. But I'm not in the same situation as many others. I can tell you right now, I'm not in the same situation as many people in the construction industry. I really feel for them because I have buddies who basically say, look, you know, hey, I didn't like the way this guy was treating me on site. So I said something, and he was out of work for about 2 weeks until he found something with another company. Sure, he's unionized, but the union could only help him so much, especially when finding work. I mean, we hear it almost every day now, you know, with Unifor, I guess. They're trying to find their people work. It's the same thing. Companies just say no. That's it. So do you stand up for yourself at work? Frank Newman says yes. I say yes. But once again, it's high risk, high reward. Not sure if it's the best thing for you, but it could be at that point. You know, if your mental health is deteriorating every single day you go to work, I mean, why don't you do something about it? And I know it's tough, especially because you need the paycheck. Maybe you don't have a backup plan. Not everybody does. There's no plan B. This is it, and I'm really hoping that this job works out for me in the end. Maybe you've experienced this. Maybe this has been your story. Maybe you want to share a story with me. Maybe you need some advice. I mean, I'm not really much of an advisor at all. But maybe this is something that you want to work through. I mean, I've faced some really tough situations before, but I mean, maybe they're not as tough as yours. And once again, every industry and every situation is different. Look, we'll take a quick break and we'll come back with some of your thoughts. 1-800-570-5715, 519-570-2545, or star 570 from your phones. It's Brandon Graziano filling in for Brian Burke on Kitchener today on 570 News.